Well, today we're going to continue with the series we started last week. We're working with some really interesting ideas and information that are found in a couple of books that were published just earlier this year. The first one is called Enlightenment Now: The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. That's by Steven Pinker. And the other is from our old friend Hans Rosling, Factfulness: 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than We Think. So last week, we talked about how there is this segment of the global population. You may be familiar with some of these folks. They seem to resist the idea and push back against the idea that humankind is actually making measurable and truly remarkable progress when it comes to things like life expectancy, health, wealth, the environment, and so on. Steven Pinker has this term for it. He calls it progressophobia. 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 I like progressophobia. That sounds a little better. And this is more than just your basic run-of-the-mill old-fashioned pessimism. It has an element of denialism, meaning that a true progressophobe won't be easily persuaded by facts and evidence. And it usually has to do with an ideology, political, religious, or some other form. People are holding on to a belief in order to remain part of a group, because that group provides them with a sense of belonging and a sense of identity. So you believe certain things, and you're a part of that group. It's a tribal thing, or one of the analogies I like to use is it's like belonging to a lodge or a secret society where you have a password or a secret handshake, or maybe a special hat. As I was writing that, I couldn't help thinking of. Anybody recognize Fred Flintstone? Anybody know what that hat is a symbol of? The Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes. In fact, I was going to come up with a special prize this morning for anyone who could actually remember the secret password that they had. I don't have a prize, but does anyone remember it?
Dennis has. No.
Rick, I think Rick has it. What is it?
They do this finger thing.
Well, that's a secret handshake. You can ask me afterwards. I'll tell you what the password is. It's ack-ack-a-dack, dack-dack-a-ack. Come on. Of course. Further evidence of my misspent childhood. Yes, the Loyal Order of Water Buffalo with their hat that shows that they belong. But you see, in some groups, the special hat is professing a belief in something that is demonstrably at odds with reality. And I'll give you one extreme example of how that works. Did you know that there are people in the world today who really and truly believe and will argue with you vehemently that the earth is a flat disk?
Yeah.
Now, at first, I thought it was a big hoax. I really did. I thought this was just one big practical joke, like they were punking us or pranking us on a grand scale. But much to my dismay, I found out that it's not a hoax. These people are serious. You know, for me, and I hope for all of us here, I think the most convincing proof that the earth is like kind of round, like a ball, not perfectly round, but you know, like a sphere. We got all these photos that have been taken from NASA missions over the years, and especially the video that they take from the space station, right? They're up there in the space station with the camera focused on the earth, and every so often that same figure comes around, and so on and so forth. But that does not convince the flat earther. According to them, everything that NASA has ever done or ever will do is an elaborate hoax, supported by a massive worldwide conspiracy. And it would have to be massive and worldwide because you've got space agencies in every other developed country around the world that have had people up there and have put satellites up and so on and so forth. You see, that's the kind of thinking where people say that they have the secret that the powerful elites are trying to hide. And so, believe it or not, that kind of thinking happens in other places. It bleeds over into other areas as well, which is why Hans Rosling felt the need to write a book like factfulness. As Steven Pinker once told us, and we talked about this last week, if you want to come up with an accurate appraisal of the state of the world, all you have to do is observe, count, and measure. And this approach will work with seemingly intangible things like happiness and meaning too. The process is a little bit different, but happiness can be measured. We spent all last fall talking about happiness with that book by Matthew Ricard. So today we're going to be looking at some of the ways that things have been getting better, not just here, but around the world. And once again, I'm not arguing that everything is okay, all right? The point is that humankind has been steadily solving some important problems, which gives us valuable information about how we might be able to keep doing that, because we're going to need to keep doing that because the challenges are going to keep coming. And there's no guarantee that we will keep doing that. We need a disclaimer here, okay? You've seen those commercials on TV for these different financial services and investment planning outfits. You know what they say? They say that past performance is no guarantee of future results. That's true. But as we know, human knowledge, just like your investment portfolio, is proven to be incremental. You build on what has come before. And when it comes to human knowledge, we build on what we've already learned. We have the good fortune at this point in history to be standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. So I think most of us would agree that it's better to be alive than dead, right? Healthy rather than sick, and so on and so forth. Well, let me put this first graph up here. Take a look at what's been happening with life expectancy since the year 1771. 1771, all the way back there on the left side, the global life expectancy average was 29. US and Europe, it was a little higher, closer to 35. Now, fast forward to 2015, global average is up to 71. And that's a huge increase. And we can see the US and Europe, they're still a little bit higher, but the world is starting to catch up with us in terms of life expectancy. From 29 to 71, something good is happening there. And that goes along with the fact that infant mortality has fallen dramatically. I think we got that on the next slide here. Infant mortality has fallen dramatically from 1750 to the present date. Let's see here. In the late 1700s, the percentage of children who died before they reached the age of 15 was between 30 and 50%. All right? Now, yeah, pause for a moment. Let that sink in. All right? If you had 10 children, on average, you could expect 3 to 5 to die before they reach 15 years old. As a result, people had a lot of children, and they kept on reproducing as fast as they could because they were facing these horrific odds of their children surviving. Now, today, look at that over there. In every place except maybe places like Ethiopia, the percentage of children who die before they reach 15 is less than 1%. That's huge. Now, we put those two together, and this might be a place where some healthy pessimism would be warranted, all right? If fewer children are dying and everyone is living longer, won't that result in a population bomb? Overpopulation and eventually mass starvation. That is not an illogical concern. Now, when I said population bomb, I was quoting the title of this book here, which came out in 1968. A Stanford professor named Paul Ehrlich. 1968, he wrote this book predicting that by the 1980s, well behind us now, by the 1980s, 65 million Americans and 4 billion people from other places in the world would starve to death because population had exceeded our ability to feed people. They were actually pushing for public policy based on this kind of thinking that would cut off food aid to other countries in order to make sure that we had enough for our people to survive. And by the way, Ehrlich wasn't the only one to make that kind of a dire prediction. You've probably heard of a guy named Thomas Malthusian, said the Malthusian specter. He said something similar back in 1798, that the world was going to basically, people were going to starve to death within the next 100 years. And of course, none of that happened. So we ask, what went wrong? Or maybe we should say, what went right? Yeah? What went right? Huh? Well, oh, by the way, first of all, let's go to the next one here. This is from the Wall Street Journal. The population bomb was a dud. Paul Ehrlich got it wrong because he never understood human potential. Hell is other people. I'm going to go back to that for a minute, Jacob, because it's hard to read, but this is interesting. Hell is other people. These oft misquoted words were written by Jean-Paul Sartre, but would take a Stanford biologist to elevate them into a full-fledged ethos that would be used to justify outrages inflicted on millions of innocent people, most of them weak, vulnerable, and poor. And I guess there's a little subtext here which tells us that this kind of denialism, this kind of pessimism, this kind of progressophobia has real world consequences that we have to be aware of. So Mr. Ehrlich was wrong, Thomas Malthus was wrong, and what went right? Well, first of all, here's the thing. When more children survive, the paradox is that people tend to have less children, or fewer children. The other factor, of course, is that we're producing a lot more food with less land. Here's the way Steven Pinker says it. He says, another way of stating the bounty is that between 1961 and 2009, the amount of land used to grow food increased by 12%. But the amount of food that was grown increased by 300%. That's a pretty good ratio. One environmentalist said that it's possible that we may have already reached what they call peak farmland. We will never need more land for growing food than we are using today. And that's a good bet if we keep learning and discovering more about food production. Okay, but we still have to talk about population growth, right? Aren't we going to simply overpopulate the world and use up the resources no matter how we go about finding them? Well, here are the facts on population growth. All right, 1962, that is when the rate of global population growth peaked. That's that big spike that you see there in the middle. After the peak, the rate of growth dropped from 2.1% to 1.2% by 2010. So the growth rate was cut almost in half. All right? Now, the projection is that the growth rate is going to continue to decline. By 2070, it'll reach close to zero. And at that point, the total world population will decrease as well. That's what you're seeing there. Yes, it's going to increase, but at some point it's going to reverse itself. They're figuring 2075, 2100, all right? Now, nobody has a crystal ball here, but I've seen these statistics in many different places. You know, future projections are educated guesses, but there are reasons to be optimistic. And the big one is this: better educated girls grow up to have fewer children. This is a graphic from a UNESCO study done in 2010 of developing nations. The higher the female literacy rate, the lower the rate of population growth. So, take a look at the top there. That's Afghanistan and Yemen. The red side of the bars shows a low literacy rate, and they're the ones that have the highest rate of population growth. Go down to the bottom countries there, Jamaica through Thailand. They have a higher rate of female literacy. Their growth rates are much smaller than the countries at the top of that. So they can track it. Another bit of the good news here is that there are more young women enrolling in secondary schools around the world. Here's a comparison of that trend. This is between 1975 and 1997. Again, the same color bars. You can see the top bar shows enrollment in secondary schools in 1975. The bottom greenish colored bar shows what happened by 1997. And you can just, I mean, you know, it's there to see. The increase in enrollment is across the board. It's the highest in industrialized countries, but some of the areas that people express concern about, sub-Saharan Africa, the different Arab states, enrollment is up as well, and significantly so. And of course we have that very courageous young woman, Malala, who literally put her life on the line for women and girls to be educated, and I think that her example is helping to make a difference, and I think she's just getting started. So that's all of those are reasons to be optimistic. And so this has been, that's some pretty significant stuff right there. But just in case all of this good news isn't enough to convince, in the time we have left, we're going to zip through a whole bunch of other good news here. Starting with legal slavery, which was practiced by 193 countries in 1800. By 2017, it's down to 3, although depending on how you want to define slavery, it could be as high as 15. You know, people once defended slavery using the Bible, and today it's unconscionable. What changed? Human consciousness? Maybe we're getting gentler and more compassionate. Perhaps we've evolved. Oil spills are decreasing. That's just a little bit of interesting news. There hasn't been a major oil spill, as you can see there, and, since around 2004. I guess we might conclude that safety regulations and accountability work. How about this? HIV. Look at the rate of HIV. It peaked in 1996. Rates per million people from 549 down to 241 by 2016. That's important, and I think that trend will increase because we're learning more and more about how to fight viruses. Every day we learn more. The next one, and this one is particularly significant on Memorial Day weekend, battle deaths are down significantly from their peak. 1942, World War II was raging. 201 battle deaths per 100,000 people worldwide. It's down significantly over the years. And one of the reasons for that is because more countries are becoming more developed, more wealthy, and more healthy. And what we find is that wealthy and developed nations discover that war is bad for business. So those nations don't do it anymore on the kind of scales that used to be common. The kind of stuff we see these days are civil wars and wars between failed states and things like that. Next one here, the death penalty is on its way out in more and more countries. Now this one is interesting because the USA finds itself in an interesting club with the countries where executions still take place in larger numbers. Countries like China, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, North Korea. Reminds me of that old Groucho Marx routine. He said, "I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member." Well, that might be one club that we want to get out of. All right, this next one, plane crash deaths are way down. Way down since the 40s. People are traveling billions of miles in greater safety than ever. Reminds me of a comedian I once heard who did this monologue about how people like to complain about flying. You know, they say things like, "Oh, it was the worst day in my life. We got on the plane, they made us sit on the runway for 40 minutes. Oh, really? Well, what happened next? Did you fly through the air incredibly like a bird? Did you soar into the clouds impossibly? Did you take part in the miracle of human flight and then land softly on giant tires? You were sitting in the sky in a chair like a Greek god on a throne. People say there's delays. Air travel's too slow. New York to California in 5 hours. That used to take 5 months. And a bunch of you would die on the way there, and you'd get shot in the neck with an arrow, and the other passengers would just bury you and put a stick there with your head on it and keep on walking. Yeah, things are getting better. People, for some reason, still want to complain. Look at what happened with child labor. This one was surprising. 1950, 28% of children aged 5 to 14 worked full-time under bad conditions. That's gone down to 10% in 2012. I think we can get that one down to 0. Deaths from natural disaster are down from their peak in the 1930s. We're learning more and more about how to predict them and about how to stay out of harm's way. Nuclear arms have been reduced by almost 25% since 1986. Smallpox has been eradicated and other common diseases will follow. Hunger has decreased from 28% in 1970, this is in our lifetimes, from 28% in 1970 to 11% in 2015. Look at this one on the right to vote for women. 1893, just one country. Today, 193 countries. By the way, what do you think that one country was back in 1893, the first one to do that? New Zealand. New Zealand. Yep. Finally, the percentage of people living in democracy. This is an interesting one. 1% in 1816. Look at how that ratchets up and down. Till today, 56% people living in democracy in 2015. Now here's why that's important, according to Steven Pinker. He says, a good democratic government allows people to pursue their lives in safety, protected from the violence of anarchy, and in freedom, protected from the violence of tyranny. For that reason alone, democracy is a major contributor to human flourishing. But it's not the only reason. Democracies also have higher rates of economic growth, fewer wars and genocides, healthier and better educated citizens, and virtually no famines. If the world has become more democratic over time, that is progress. So, once again, and in closing this morning, the question is, what does all of this admittedly good news have to do with what we're about in unity? Well, first of all, the one big thing that ties all of those good things together is that they are the product of collective human effort. They didn't just happen all on their own. It means that humankind has something. Humankind possesses this inherent capacity to work together, to increase the good stuff, reduce the bad stuff. And this is something that Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore recognized from the very beginning, which I think is best exemplified in these statements that he wrote in a couple of his books. He said, humankind is the power of God in action. To humankind is given the highest power in the universe, the conscious power of thought. The thinking faculty in humankind makes each person a free agent because it is our creative center. In and through this one power, we establish our consciousness. We build our world. I think sometimes we forget about how some of these founding writings in Unity, Charles Fillmore, Emily Cady, how they gave us such a non-theistic and almost humanistic definition of God. And they focused on the power that we have. That's probably why Eric Butterworth wrote that book, Discover the Power Within. They focused on the power that we have to do these things, which also means that we also have great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. So next week, we're going to start looking at some of the reasons why we have been able to use this power for the greater good. It has to do with the word enlightenment, but perhaps not the way that we're most accustomed to hearing it. More on that next week. Thank you.